Good afternoon, everybody. It is Tuesday, February 15th. The question we have been getting a lot lately is what happens if Russia invades Ukraine? Now, first of all, let me say that I don't have a clue whether Russia is going to invade the Ukraine or not. I certainly do not have any close ties to diplomatic channels over there. I do not have eyes and ears on the ground in Eastern Europe, so I don't have any idea what Russia does or does not plan to do in regards to Ukraine. But it does get me thinking. We're adding Ukraine now to all of these other issues that have basically captured investors' attention. We have a very real ongoing threat of inflation and how embedded this is going to be in the economy. We have Federal Reserve raising interest rates. We've got what I think is actually a big deal. Maybe that's going to be our next video that we do. What's happening with the truckers up in Canada, because how that plays out, I think, could arguably be as important as what's happening in the Ukraine right now. But this is what we're talking about right now, is the Ukraine. So, do they invade? Do they not invade? What could that possibly mean? The answer is I don't know, but we can look to history to see how other major geopolitical events have impacted the financial markets. So I'm going to take a look at my other screen over here. Let's just take a look. So U.S. operation in Cambodia back in 1970. Market went down 7.8% after that. A year later, market was up 35% from those lows. Oil embargo in 1973 and the October War over in the Middle East. Basically, both of those happening at the same time. The actual decline during the initial reaction was only about 1.4%, but that was the start of a really horrifically ugly bear market. We ended up being 1 year later down 37% in the financial markets. The Iranian hostage crisis, initial reaction down 2.6% after that occurred. A year later, up 29.3%. U.S. invasion of Panama, down 2.9% in the immediate wake of that. 1 year later, up, down 3.6%. Iraq invades Kuwait. Market was off about 13.6% in the immediate aftermath of Saddam invading Kuwait. 1 year later, the market was up 28.4%. U.S. embassies bombed in Nairobi, Kenya. That was back in 1998. The market went down 2.5% on that news. 1 year later, the market was up 25.2%. The 9/11 attacks. The initial decline was 11.6% after the towers came down during those 9/11 attacks. 1 year later, the market was still down. It was down about 13.7%. Arab Spring in Libya, market went down about 4.8% in the immediate news of that. A year later, the market was up about 6.4%. So what can we get from all this information? What we can probably reasonably assume based on this is every time there's been an the immediate reaction of the financial markets after one of these big geopolitical events has been negative. I think if we see something that happens in Ukraine, Russia invades, and particularly, I think about some of these other things that could occur with an invasion. Less so much two armies lined up across a battlefield in Eastern Europe. What happens if Russia shuts off the gas to Europe? What happens if the Russian Navy cuts all of the communication fiber optics that are going in from North America to Europe through Ireland? When I heard the other day that the Russian fleet was off the coast of Ireland, I'm like, that would make sense that they would be there. So you're talking about these other things that could be extremely disruptive in the event of a Russian invasion of Ukraine. So what I could say with some reasonable assurance is probably the market doesn't like it, at least in the near term. You'll probably see some kind of significant downdraft in the markets. How much we would take off, I wouldn't speculate to guess. I think there's a lot of things right now that have investors spooked, and I think a Ukrainian invasion could be a linchpin that sends the markets tumbling. The question is what happens a year later? What happens in the aftermath of that as long-term investors? And looking at some of this data, the one thing, again, the correlation that I see is there's three cases really, where the market was down 1 year after these big geopolitical events. You had in the October War 1973. Well, that was a terrible market. The economy was mired in inflation and recession and a lot of other headwinds at that point, and the market was down 37% a year later. The other one, U.S. invasion of Panama, that happened at the tail end of 1989. We were in a brief sort of reduction in economic activity. 80s and 90s were pretty good, so I won't say like full-blown recession, but we did have some hiccups there right around 1990 or so. But even in this case, the market was pretty much unchanged, down about 3%. And the other one, 9/11 attacks. Obviously, 9/11 attacks occurred in the wake of the dot-com crisis, in the wake of a lot of things that had happened when the internet bubble burst in 2000. And so, again, not a surprise that with everything that occurred in the wake of 9/11, not just for the United States in terms of how we then became much more involved in other parts of the world, it's not really surprising because economically some tough things were happening in the country as well. Market was down about 13.7% again 1 year after the initial reaction from those attacks. So as for me, I'm going to continue to watch what's happening over in Eastern Europe, seeing what Russia is going to be doing over there. It definitely has, for sure, investors in the entire world on edge. Again, with reasonable insurance, we're going to get a reaction. If the Russians move in there, we will see a short-term reaction. But I think the greater question in terms of how long that lasts, what the longer-term, more meaningful impact is for the financial markets, it really depends on where we are in the economic cycle and how our economy here at home and then also around the world performs in the wake of this invasion, if it occurs. That's just my thoughts. We will see. Again, I don't have any special insight or knowledge of what will or will not happen over there, but felt I should comment on it because we've been getting a lot of questions about it. If you've stayed with me now for 6 minutes, thank you very much and look forward to our next installment. Take care, everybody.